The tale opens with a young warrior struggling to catch his breath while standing bravely before a terrifying beast. The group soon realizes that the enormous creature before them is actually a formidable dungeon boss called the Wingless Dragon, which inhabits the 67th level. The massive dragon unleashed a powerful burst of flames, scorching everything in its path. The group of adventurers suddenly found themselves facing a serious threat. Fear swept over the sorceress as she urgently alerted everyone about the imminent attack, confessing her uncertainty about whether her protective magic would be strong enough to withstand it. At that instant, the elderly man clad in armor spots something unusual, leaving him momentarily frozen in shock. Without warning, a tiny green being that looks much like a goblin steps out from within the fiery blaze. The dragon unleashed a powerful roar, signaling that it was readying itself for another lethal assault. The entire crowd stared in astonishment, unable to comprehend how a goblin could appear in a location like this. Just as the dragon unleashes a colossal burst of flames, the goblin surged ahead with astonishing speed, springing onto the massive creature and delivering a devastating blow. As the attack landed, the goblin shouted triumphantly, its voice echoing with pride. With remarkable speed and dexterity, the creature darted out of danger and immediately struck back, delivering a powerful blow with its wooden club. The entire group remains frozen in shock, unable to move. The young man with hair stares in disbelief, struggling to comprehend how a tiny goblin could possibly overcome the powerful dragon with such overwhelming strength. Before long, it becomes clear to them that the dragon has truly fallen, slain by just one blow from the small goblin. This discovery leads them to question whether someone might have called forth such a creature. The elderly man noticed a figure standing on a hill close by and directed the group's attention toward that person. The true identity of the enigmatic figure, responsible for calling forth the goblin, is finally revealed. They come to understand that he is the one behind the unusual summoning. Prior to the upcoming conflict and in a different setting, could be found busy at a construction site. He appeared genuinely happy while carrying out his tasks, which caught the attention of his fellow workers. Their curiosity grew as they noticed his bright demeanor, prompting them to remark on his unexpected smile. Lost in thought, hoisted a heavy sack of cement onto his shoulder, quietly reminding himself that he was nothing more than an ordinary goblin. He sipped his water thoughtfully, contemplating his circumstances. In his mind, it seemed completely normal for someone with his abilities to be frail and trapped within a low-ranking dungeon, unable to escape its bounds. He kept dwelling on his disappointment with the world around him, convinced that certain people could achieve wealth in an instant, while someone like him would always remain insignificant, regardless of how much they learned or how hard they tried. Happened to catch a conversation among his colleagues, who were discussing Mr.'s sudden absence from work. They mentioned that Mr. no longer showed up because he was completely absorbed in playing a well-known game called Gate of Heaven. The game offered a completely immersive virtual reality experience, blending seamlessly with everyday life. Players who managed to uncover secret classes within the game found themselves rewarded with immense wealth. Remembered the recent release of a popular game called Gate of Heaven. Players became so engrossed in the game that the outside world faded completely from their minds. As the technology gained popularity, the cost of the equipment increased. However, internet cafes made it possible for people with little money like him to still experience it. With the game's rise in fame, actual cash began to pour into it. The situation escalated until players started exchanging virtual items for real-world cash. Reflected with a heavy heart, longing for the times when playing the game brought him happiness. The scene transitions into the game world, where unleashes one of his abilities and initiates a powerful assault. He unleashed a mighty attack known as Rock Strike, and after landing the blow, he was awarded 3 ores as a prize. Despite his efforts, frustration welled up inside him as he shouted in exasperation, unable to believe how absurd things had become. He wondered how, after all the effort he had put in, even more challenges awaited him. Not even in the virtual world could he escape, as he remained overwhelmed by debt. His eyes filled with tears as a wave of frustration washed over him. In his mind, He wondered why his journey had not yet transformed him into a legendary hero or led him to the beautiful woman he had always imagined. Doubt crept in as he questioned whether the game, Gate of Heaven, was truly worth all the effort. All at once, falls silent as his eyes land on an advanced healing crystal. The significance of his discovery quickly dawns on him. This rare item could fetch a price of at least 300,000 won. Excitement surges through him, replacing his earlier complaints with pure happiness. Overcome with joy, he bursts into laughter and moves with unrestrained energy, fully believing that moments like this are what make working in the mines worthwhile. While he savored the moment, a group of people emerged behind him. A woman in the group caught sight of acting oddly and became paralyzed with embarrassment as he realized their eyes were on him. Caught sight of the stunning woman, and her remarkable beauty left him even more unsettled. The woman remarked that she had observed his daily mining routine, implying that his expertise in mining must be impressive. Admitted that he was fairly skilled, while the woman went on to explain that her group had been making their way through the dungeon when they encountered a massive boulder blocking their route. Despite her teammates' impressive strength, none of them were skilled at mining. Realizing this, she turned to and requested his assistance in breaking through the barrier. Paused, uncertain because he worried his lack of experience might put him at risk. However, a dwarf from the group offered words of comfort, explaining that sole responsibility would be mining while the others handled any threats from monsters. His eyes widened in astonishment when he realized who had spoken. A dwarf stood before him. Noticing his reaction, the dwarf explained that had likely expected him, as the only dwarf present, to handle the mining. The dwarf went on to say that must think dwarves are weak in battle, a notion that left the dwarf feeling both offended and undervalued. After considering the situation for a brief moment, comes to the conclusion that teaming up with the group might offer a chance to learn new skills and acquire some much-needed ores. Despite knowing that resurrection was possible within the game, he couldn't shake his nervousness about their current depth in the dungeon. Memories of a terrifying presence lurking within the game surfaced in his mind, filling him with fear that refused to fade. The existence of that entity posed significant risks to his well-being. The stunning woman walked up to him once more, her voice gentle and kind as she requested his assistance. She explained that he was just her type, someone with strength and talent for mining. Hearing this, was overwhelmed with emotion and instantly accepted her request. He immediately began to regret his decision, questioning why he had agreed so hastily and without thinking things through. Upon stepping into the cave, spotted a gray wolf. The creature was identified as a level 7 monster. The sight startled him, since he had anticipated encountering something much more formidable. Despite his efforts, his abilities remained far inferior to those possessed by these terrifying creatures. The wolf sprang toward with savage intensity, causing him to shriek in fright as he desperately called out for his mother, his voice trembling with the raw panic of a frightened child. Just as danger seemed unavoidable, a striking woman emerged and unleashed her salamander flame ability, swiftly overpowering the creature and rescuing him from harm. Lee, a skilled sorceress at level 39, approached him with worry etched on her face. She wanted to confirm he was unharmed and gently inquired if he was injured. Could hardly believe the strength she possessed when she defeated every monster at once, leaving him in awe and prompting him to express his gratitude for her rescue. Warned him to stay close by her side, reminding him that venturing far could put him in harm's way. For a brief instant, wonders if this could be the start of the love story he has always imagined. At that instant, a new teammate arrived, a powerful young man who skillfully avoided the monster's strikes with ease. The character scoffs at what's happening, making it clear through their attitude that they're taking things seriously and have no intention of treating this moment like a game. The warrior unleashed a unique ability known as the swing of the giant wheel, vanquishing all the monsters in one powerful blow. He goes on to clarify that his current mission involves finding a rare ore, one so tough that only someone with advanced mining abilities could break it, which is the reason they brought onto their team. Although knows they require his expertise, he can't help but feel both offended and irritated by the tone they use when addressing him. He realized that they viewed him only as a means to mine for them, treating him like a mere instrument, despite the fact that they had sought his assistance to begin with. Chooses to speak up, stepping forward to face the warrior. He refuses to let himself be ignored, making it clear that he also knows how to fight and shouldn't be underestimated just because of his age. Fueled by anger, slammed his fists against the enormous boulder, determined to demonstrate that his abilities extended far beyond those of an ordinary miner. With a powerful swing, he raises his voice, making it clear to everyone that he refuses to be seen as weak. Despite determined attempts, both the tall man and the dwarf observe that the rock remains unbroken. They exchange hushed words, questioning if the details they had heard about valuable ore hidden behind the boulder were true, and they quietly mention the significant loss they would suffer if their search turned up empty. The tall man issued a warning to the dwarf, making it clear that there would be consequences if the information proved to be untrue. At that instant, experiences a sharp sense of humiliation. Although he is no stranger to being undervalued and constantly endangering himself for meager earnings, a wave of self-disappointment washes over him nonetheless. He attempts to steady his nerves and resumes his tasks as usual, persuading himself that today is no different from any other uneventful day in his life. To his astonishment, the stone unexpectedly crumbles right in front of him. The group stared in disbelief as an unusual sight appeared from behind the rock. Stumbled upon a strange door that glowed with an eerie light, instantly understanding that she had found a secret dungeon. The whole group stands in shock, while struggles to accept that they have truly discovered a secret dungeon. He eagerly suggests that they could earn unique rewards and might have the chance to switch to secret classes. His voice rang out in excitement as she announced the discovery of the grand prize, her joy filling the air. Meanwhile, responded with a sly smile, her tone dripping with sarcasm as she questioned if truly belonged to the group claimed to represent. Brimmed with excitement, believing this moment could be his opportunity to transform his life, much like the legendary Mr., whose stories he had often heard. He is taken aback as the tall man unexpectedly switches to P mode and launches a fierce assault against him. Collapsed heavily onto the floor, his body racked with pain and short breaths as nearly 480 health points drained away. As he fought for air, the tall man's voice echoed in his ears, ridiculing the difficulty of locating the secret dungeon. Looked at the surroundings with disdain, thinking to herself that this was just a beginner's area, and anyone could have gotten here with nothing more than a basic mining ability. His eyes narrowed with fury as he listened to their words, his anger intensifying when the tall man dismissed him as nothing more than a bystander while they claimed credit for the battle. In that instant, pieced together the truth. These were the very people who had ambushed him. The realization dawned on him that they had always been aware of the secret dungeon, and he judged them as cowards for hiding that knowledge. The tall man seized his head with a harsh grip and taunted him, revealing that they had always been aware of his actions. Since had only offered minimal assistance, the man decided they would end his life swiftly. His eyes grew wide with astonishment as the sting of betrayal and the sudden attack registered in her mind. Regained consciousness to discover that he remained trapped within the dungeon. Initially, he believed his captors had spared his life out of compassion. Only a short time passes before he notices that his powerful healing crystal lies broken. The crystal had activated on its own to bring him back after his health dropped to nothing, revealing that he had truly died and been resurrected. Seethed with anger at the loss of the crystal, valued at 300,000 won, his fury erupting in a loud, anguished scream. At that instant, realizes the entrance to the secret dungeon remains ajar, indicating that the challenges inside have not yet been fully conquered. After suffering the loss of the precious crystal, makes up his mind to stay. Determined to get back at the group that ridiculed him, he resolves to sneak into the secret dungeon, aiming to sabotage their mission and completely change the course of his own fate. With a surge of anger, he rushed headlong toward the radiant doorway, his determination set on turning their world into a true nightmare. Launched himself energetically into the secret dungeon, his voice echoing with excitement as he declared that the dungeon was ready for his arrival. He was caught off guard by what happened afterward. The entrance turned out to be uneven rather than smooth. As soon as the door opened, all eyes turned toward and he stumbled awkwardly into the room. He fell hard to the floor, suffering another injury and losing 80 health points. Frustration filled him as he complained about the stairs being placed immediately after the entrance. Slowly opened his eyes and became aware of the rough stone floor beneath him, a clear sign that his plunge had landed him inside the secret dungeon. As he pushed himself up, the reality of his situation hit him. He was truly inside the mysterious place. But what startled him even more was the discovery that his remaining health had dropped to just 20 points. Scanning his surroundings, his eyes widen in shock as he spots an enormous, fearsome goblin perched on a throne ahead of him. Over the creature, a sign proclaims, "Temple of the Goblins." Disappointment washes over as he internally scoffs at the scene, questioning if this is nothing more than a hidden goblin lair when he had hoped for something grander. As silence settles around him, unease creeps in, and he grows wary, starting to question the whereabouts of his teammates. As he pivots, his eyes land on a hand resting on the ground beside him, startling him unexpectedly. As traced the noise that had caught his attention, shock seized him when he discovered the dwarf from the previous group sprawled on the ground, drenched in blood. Was taken aback as he instantly identified the dwarf, his mind racing with questions about what could have happened to him. A prompt flashed across the screen, inquiring if he possessed a resurrection skill, but he admitted that such an ability was not part of his arsenal. Suspected that the dwarf was reluctant to activate the resurrection button because he didn't want to give up the opportunity to explore the dungeon. In his mind, this hesitation seemed greedy. Without warning, a message flashes across the screen, alerting him that the dungeon he has entered is far too advanced for his current abilities, and strongly advising him to exit right away. At that instant, a blood-curdling scream reaches his ears, filling him with dread. He spins around, fear gripping him, and quickly recognizes that the voice came from a fellow teammate. His eyes widened with fear when a massive hand reached down, seized the tall man, and squeezed him without mercy. Couldn't shake the odd feeling about what was happening. Although this place was known as a goblin temple, a monster unlike any she expected had suddenly shown up. A monstrous creature known as Jaeger emerged, its power marked at level 80. Confronted by this overwhelming threat, collapsed in terror, certain that escape was impossible. Struggles to comprehend that the creature standing before him possesses a formidable level of 80. He observes while the creature seizes the tall man, getting ready to consume him with terrifying brutality. His heart races with panic when he witnesses the horrifying sight of the monster savagely ripping the man apart. The brutality of the scene churns his stomach, leaving him feeling sick. He fights to keep his stomach from turning, understanding that he is seeing the most dreadful outcome possible, and thinks about how Gate of Heaven pushed realism beyond acceptable limits. His thoughts drifted to the advanced technology powering the game, marveling at how it could replicate real-life sensations, including pain, for the players. However, he also understood that built-in safety features ensured that encounters with weaker monsters would never cause players any significant discomfort. However, his fear intensifies as desperate cries for help echo through the air. Froze, fear gripping him as he questioned his ability to assist anyone when faced with a creature of such overwhelming strength. Then recalls that the suffering and trauma experienced within the game linger far beyond the virtual world. These sensations have a direct impact on the brain, and in severe situations, they can lead to brain injury or even result in actual death. Overwhelmed by terror, bolts from the terrifying creature, silently vowing that he will not allow the monster to claim his life within the game. As he ran away, he attempted to convince himself that he wasn't to blame, reasoning that they had been the ones to leave him behind in the first place. He continued to run, realizing in his heart that he was powerless and unable to support anyone, and dashed off, overwhelmed by hopelessness. While sprinting forward, firmly tells himself that survival is his top priority, even if it means facing a lonely existence. Without warning, a message flashed before him, declaring that the Goblin Lord sensed a similarity between himself, and in terms of fear and frailty, which left shocked and bewildered. He tries to make sense of the message, his mind racing with questions about the identity of the mysterious Goblin Lord. He glanced toward the enormous creature perched on the throne, his heart heavy with sadness and disbelief, wondering if he truly was the fragile coward described in the message. his face flushed with anger, turned toward the goblin lord who had just insulted him as weak and cowardly. A mix of sadness and rage welled up inside him as he admitted that he never wished to be seen that way. He keeps his gaze fixed on, who lies motionless on the floor, and questions whether others believe his weakness and helplessness were a choice he made. Reflected that, had he possessed even the slightest bit of power, fleeing would not have been necessary. Shortly after, the story shifted to show being crushed beneath the monster's weight. Remembered his own experiences, feeling disappointed that he had always wished for a dignified career where others would treat him with respect. He shares his longing to battle monsters like his peers, wishing he wasn't trapped in the mines to pay off debts from parents he never met. His eyes filled with tears as he broke down, his voice rising in a desperate cry about all the goals he had failed to reach. He insisted through his sobs that he had done nothing to warrant being called weak. Charged furiously at the goblin lord, who lounged on the throne, his eyes blazing with defiance as he declared the goblin lord was nothing more than a goblin and had no authority to judge him. Frustration laced his thoughts as he remembered being belittled both in reality and within the game, and now even a goblin dared to pity him. The feeling of being overwhelmed surged through, and he cried out, admitting he was indeed a nobody, but insisted there was nothing shameful about it. Just then, noticed a notification materialize before his eyes, informing him that he had been granted the title of honorary goblin, and that goblins would come to his assistance whenever he needed them. Immediately after, a second message emerged, announcing that he had fulfilled the requirements to access a secret class, and inquiring if he wished to switch his class to Goblin Summoner. Stared at the message, disbelief flooding her mind as she tried to make sense of what a hidden class could possibly be. Although presented with a valuable chance, his face twisted in anger as he let out a harsh, mocking laugh. He couldn't believe the absurd proposal and loudly declared his refusal, making it clear he wanted no part of it. Despite his rejection, the system proceeds to notify him that his transformation into a goblin is already finalized, which only intensifies his irritation and sense of helplessness. Just then, the fearsome creature known as Jaeger made his way back, moving closer while letting out a bone-chilling roar. Comes to the grim understanding that escape is no longer possible. He acknowledges that fleeing serves no purpose now, and recognizes that his actions have crossed a line from which he cannot return. He activated an ability granted by his recently assigned class, calling forth a goblin to step into battle on his behalf. A tiny, frail goblin suddenly emerged, letting out an ear-splitting, high-pitched screech. His hopes sink when he notices how weak and fragile the creature looks. He decides it might be best used as bait to divert the monster's attention, giving him a chance to get away. Instructed the goblin to launch an attack against the monster. With a booming voice, someone urges the goblin to defeat the creature. Responding to the encouragement, the goblin rushes at the beast with unexpected strength. With fierce energy and overwhelming force, the monstrous Jaeger hurled itself forward, launching an aggressive assault. At the same time, gets ready to escape, convinced that this moment offers him the perfect opportunity to get away. Just as prepared to run away, he was stunned to witness the goblin he had summoned, who appeared weak at first, strike the monster with an astonishingly strong attack, inflicting devastating damage estimated at nearly 100 million points. The monstrous Jaeger crashed to the ground in utter defeat, while stood frozen in shock, struggling to grasp the reality of the scene before him. Watched in shock as his experience points skyrocketed at an unbelievable rate after the monster fell, leaving him overwhelmed by disbelief and amazement. Additional notifications popped up, letting him know that he had acquired abilities such as feeding goblins and taking them for walks. The goblin that had been summoned saw its experience level rise rapidly. Found herself even more bewildered than before, unable to make sense of the situation unfolding around her. Was stunned to discover that the goblin he had summoned, which appeared frail and harmless, was actually far stronger than he had ever imagined. The level had actually reached its absolute maximum. He remains motionless, shock overtaking him while vivid memories of the moment Jaeger the monster consumed the tall member of his old team replay in his mind. A sharp force tore through his body, inflicting serious injuries. At the same time, stands paralyzed by fear, her expression locked in a mask of terror as she watches the dreadful events unfold. Overwhelmed by the sights before her, she begins to scream uncontrollably in the real world, her cries piercing the air as she remains trapped behind the virtual reality headset. A staff member hurried over to her, worry etched across their face, urgently attempting to rouse her by any means they could think of. The staff member, overtaken by panic, quickly pulls the headset away from her head as she comes to the shocking realization that everything has descended into chaos. The man comes to the sorrowful understanding that has experienced a deep psychological trauma, leaving her unable to heal and forcing her to withdraw from the game for good. At the same time, the goblin that had called forth effortlessly overpowered the remaining monsters, unleashing attacks so powerful that the damage soared into the millions. Messages started to pop up on screen, letting him know that his level was increasing quickly because the goblin had defeated several monsters. The goblin relentlessly defeated monster after monster with astonishing intensity, as watched his screen fill with alerts about his rapidly rising level. Asked the goblin to wait as he gathered the precious items left behind by the defeated monsters. His face lit up with happiness while his bag grew heavier with treasures such as lesser mana stones and sharp wolf claws. Unable to hide his grin, he admitted to himself that the load had become too much for him to carry. Realized he had completed the hidden dungeon as soon as Jaeger fell, but sorrow weighed on him. His teammates were all gone, and the only path home now was to embrace death himself. He glanced at the goblin that had managed to clear the dungeon alone, and felt a wave of surprise when he noticed that its level remained unchanged, while his own had soared all the way to level 31. Searched for more information about the summoned goblin, but a message appeared stating that the details could not be accessed. This left him feeling frustrated, as he was unable to see any of the goblin's stats. He gazes at the goblin, his mind swirling with confusion and amazement, unable to understand how something that appears so feeble could possess such strength. Doubt creeps in as he considers whether this might be some kind of error or malfunction within the game. Without warning, bursts out in excitement, insisting that the details are unimportant. He believes he should take full advantage of the current situation before it changes, feeling proud as he thinks about how he no longer has to labor in the mines and is determined to rise as the top player in Gate of Heaven. The following day, arrived at Nara Bank and patiently waited for his number to be called. When the teller announced customer number 36, he prepared to step forward. Took a seat across from the bank clerk. The clerk examined the wolf claws he had brought and announced that they were valued at $97,001. Instead of accepting the money for himself, requested that the funds be deposited into a different account. Suddenly recalled that he still had additional belongings to sell, so he informed the clerk about these items. He continues by mentioning that he owns uncommon treasures such as Jaeger's membrane and heart, which makes the clerk's eyes widen in astonishment at how valuable his collection is. Her eyes grew wide with disbelief, as if the words she just heard were too shocking to accept. The clerk wasted no time in summoning the bank manager, leaving seated in confusion as he tried to understand why she needed her supervisor when he was already present. Sat opposite the manager of bank, who offered him tea with a warm smile and inquired whether he found the flavor to his liking. Responded with a chill in her voice, pointing out that the tea lacked warmth. This observation left the manager flustered, causing him to confess with embarrassment that he had neglected to heat the water. Filled with curiosity, approached the manager to find out the reason behind their conversation. In response, the manager courteously revealed that he had more beneficial investment opportunities for, suggesting that keeping his money in a regular account wasn't the best option. The manager presented with a promising investment opportunity that promised high returns, rather than allowing his funds to remain unused in the account. Appeared somewhat puzzled as he inquired about the investment, questioning whether such a matter truly required the manager's personal involvement. The manager grinned, expressing his belief that already recognized the worth of the items in his possession. According to current market values, his membrane and heart could fetch an enormous price. His eyes widened in disbelief as the manager revealed that their true worth amounted to 230 million won. Frozen with shock, he sat motionless, his hand gripping his teacup while he gazed into empty space. Later on, appears with a joyful expression as he cradles the goblin in his arms. He expresses his gratitude, explaining that the goblin's help allowed him to pay off 1/10 of his debt. Treating the creature affectionately, teases it as if it were a playful puppy. He kept chatting with the goblin, making a playful remark about not thinking it looked ugly. Almost immediately, the comment, realizing he couldn't honestly pretend otherwise. Following that incident, attempts to hide the goblin as they move through the city. However, he soon realizes he cannot make the creature disappear, leaving him feeling deeply embarrassed. The situation worsens when the goblin begins to shout at the top of its lungs, causing people nearby to stare and making humiliation even greater. Those nearby started to ridicule the goblin's strange looks, making sarcastic remarks as they questioned who could have brought such a creature into a public area, and what reason anyone might have for doing so. His cheeks burned brighter as bystanders him as the goblin solely because of his proximity. This misunderstanding sparked a storm of frustration and anger within him. The goblin, behaving unpredictably, walks up to a passerby on the street and starts taunting them, causing an even larger crowd to notice the commotion. Just then, a burly man with a furious look on his face stomped onto the scene and began to protest the fact that a goblin was allowed to wander through the city without restraint. Those nearby started whispering about, ridiculing him with the nickname, the Destroyer, even though most people had never even heard of him. Concern etched itself across features when he understood the true peril of the moment. He thought to himself that anyone who would use such a name was unlikely to be an average person. Hurried to intercept, trying to make her understand that the goblin meant no harm. Despite his efforts, paid him no attention and unleashed a fierce attack. Launched an aggressive attack at the goblin, aiming to end its life with a single powerful strike. The goblin reacted with astonishing swiftness, unleashing a fierce counterattack that quickly overpowered and left him badly injured. A notification appeared, informing everyone that PK mode was now enabled. It also clarified that the sensation of pain had been capped, ensuring that experienced players could not use their strength to intimidate or harm newcomers. The crowd watched in shock and fear as fell to a tiny goblin. Murmurs of disbelief spread among them as they struggled to comprehend the unexpected outcome. Soon understands the peril he faces if others discover that the lethal goblin is connected to him, causing intense fear and anxiety to rise within him. At the same time, a group from Skilled arrived on the scene. The leader of the group taunted, ridiculing him for losing to a mere goblin and labeling it as shameful. Shifted his attention to and declared that, although the goblin was nothing more than an insignificant creature, it still needed to be held accountable for the events that had befallen their guild. Sensed the situation slipping beyond his grasp. Although he was certain his goblin had the power to overpower the group, he realized that eliminating everyone would lead to serious consequences for himself. Attempted to step in and defuse the situation, assuring everyone that he would take care of the goblin on his own. However, the guild members dismissed his cautions and warned him that they would not hesitate to attack him as well if he got involved. Faced with limited choices, attempts to convince the group that attacking a small goblin will only bring trouble. At that moment, the goblin suddenly hurls a rock at them, using its rock throw ability. With blinding quickness, the goblin struck down Min, known as the Master of Speed, delivering a devastating blow that finished him off in an instant. The other guild members erupted in anger, their outrage so intense that had no choice but to sprint away as fast as possible, hardly able to comprehend how quickly the situation had become so perilous. As ran away, he felt a heavy weight of sadness and regret settle over him. He remembered how, not long ago, he had believed that having a strong goblin as an ally would make everything better. Now, he realized he had been too hopeful and blamed himself for expecting things to improve so easily. While hurried along, an enigmatic elderly man suddenly blocked his path. The old man beckoned to come with him right away, insisting there was no time to offer any explanations. Soon realizes he has been deceived, as the man has led him directly into a life-threatening trap. The man taunts, claiming this is the route that will end his life. A message abruptly popped up from the system, informing that the Goblin Lord admired his cleverness for exploiting his opponent's vulnerability and moment of distraction. The interruption, however, left feeling irritated because of how inconvenient the timing was. The message went on to portray as both cunning and sly, which filled him with such intense anger that he began to raise his voice in a furious protest against being called those names. His mind churned with resentment as he recalled the time the Goblin Lord had labeled him as weak and worthless. Now, as anger intensified, he questioned the Goblin Lord's decision to suddenly describe him as cunning in addition to his earlier insults. Stopped in his tracks, his expression clouded with sadness as he questioned why others were calling him those names, even though he knew he hadn't done anything to deserve it. He silently wonders, his thoughts tinged with resentment, why people label him as weak, pathetic, and cunning, struggling to understand their reasons. Muttered under his breath, firmly denying any responsibility for the trouble that had unfolded. In his mind, he recalled how he had simply been brought into the group by the others, only to be turned on and attacked by them without any provocation. After reflecting for a while, faces his goblin companion and firmly expresses his frustration about constantly being perceived as weak, making a vow that everything will be different from this moment forward. Pressed on, his voice alight with determination as he unveiled his scheme to seek vengeance and bring down the guild. The goblin listened eagerly, his excitement apparent at the prospect of the plan. In another part of the city, a pair of guild members moved quickly from rooftop to rooftop, keeping a close watch on and his goblin companion. As they hurried through the chase, turned to her companion, in the shadow, questioning whether his presence was truly needed on such an easy task. She assured him with confidence that she was perfectly capable of managing the mission by herself. Cautioned her against taking the goblin lightly, pointing out that despite being the guild's weakest member, the creature had defeated him in just one strike. He also emphasized that the goblin's power seemed unusually mysterious. Without warning, loud cries echoed from beneath them, prompting both to halt, worry etched on their faces. As they glanced downward, eyes widened in surprise at the sight of the cunning being forcefully thrown from a great height. The sudden appearance of the goblin behind filled him with overwhelming fear and left him utterly stunned. Launched a powerful assault on the goblin, his voice echoing through the air as he unleashed a determined blow in an effort to defeat his opponent. The surprise was overwhelming for him, as he discovered that his strike had left the goblin completely unharmed. At that instant, realized that what he had witnessed before was not a mere trick of the mind. The goblin before him genuinely held a frightening strength. A surge of fear washed over him as he became aware that his life was hanging by a thread in this perilous moment. Tried to defend himself with a swift attack, yet the goblin slipped out of harm's way without breaking a sweat. Felt a surge of fear and astonishment as his confidence wavered. The idea that someone could turn aside his attack with such little effort was something he had never considered possible. From a distance, yelled angrily at, rebuking him for remaining motionless and questioning whether he intended to let a simple goblin end his life. Attempted to steady his nerves, reassuring himself that he faced only a minor goblin. Despite his efforts, unease persisted within him, fueled by the creature's unexpected power. He questioned in his mind how a monster that appeared so frail could possibly inflict damage in the millions, and concluded that the opponent must have relied on some kind of deception. Chose to unleash a unique ability known as Absolute Evil, boosting his strength significantly, even though he remained unsure of the identity of his opponent. As the skill took effect, felt a powerful surge of strength course through his body. His movements became much slower, nearly grinding to a halt as his speed was reduced dramatically, but at the same time his attacks grew much stronger. Frustration was clear on his face as he reacted to the development. Wondered why he had chosen to unleash such a strong ability on a mere goblin, particularly when it drained so much of his mana. Explained to her that the skill could have activated on its own. Himself for his ultimate technique, the reverse fist stance. This powerful maneuver greatly boosted the force behind his strikes, though it came with the drawback of making critical hits less likely. Reluctantly made up their mind, realizing they needed to resolve the awkward moments swiftly to avoid drawing any more attention. She unleashed her unique archer ability called Storm Arrows, clearing away every effect that slowed movement nearby, all while showing her annoyance that defeating a mere goblin required such strength. The power of the Storm Arrow cleansed in of every negative effect, giving him a chance to get ready for a stronger assault. In rushed toward the goblin with determination, his voice cutting through the tension as he declared that there would be no more playing around, now that his speed had completely returned. He launched himself ahead, delivering a swift and forceful blow, but surprised him when his effort had no effect. The outcome appeared clearly. No damage had been dealt. He stood motionless, stunned by doubt and wondering if his efforts would ever have any effect. At that instant, the goblin's lips curled into a wicked smile, revealing just how much it relished what was unfolding. At last, the goblin unleashed a fearsome surprise assault, inflicting millions in damage and forcing In to cry out in pain. Stood frozen, her mind reeling from the unexpected turn of events. Remembering In's earlier boast about finishing everything with just one blow, she couldn't help but scoff inwardly, questioning if he would keep that attitude once he reached the highest level. The disbelief lingered in her thoughts as she tried to comprehend what had just transpired. She slowly started to understand that the goblin was far from ordinary. Shock overwhelmed her as she wondered if it truly was just a typical monster. Walked toward her, a dark grin spreading across his face, as he revealed that he had been responsible for calling forth the goblin. The goblin lingered at his side, letting out a chilling, unnatural laugh. Grew even more astonished, struggling to understand how a mere goblin could wield such remarkable strength, particularly when in the shadow ranked among the most formidable fighters in the guild. His expression twisted into something truly unhinged, as he insisted that it had nothing to do with her, his voice heavy with a menacing anger that made it clear just how furious he was right then. The woman's fear became evident as her body tensed. She raised her voice demanding to know his intentions and furiously questioning what she had done to warrant such treatment. His lips curled into a sinister, unsettling grin as he coldly informed her that everything was her doing, blaming her for initiating the whole situation. The woman let out a terrified scream and accused of madness. Instantly, understood that she had misconstrued what he meant. He attempted to explain that they had been the ones to start the attack, which was why both he and his goblin were now enraged at them. Despite growing discomfort, the woman continued to shriek in terror, her cries echoing around them. Feeling increasingly by the scene, urgently requested that the goblin quiet her before others could get the wrong impression about what was happening. At that instant, a few bystanders caught the sound of raised voices. Curiosity sparked among them as they searched the area, trying to figure out the source of the commotion. As soon as the group noticed the commotion unfolding on the rooftop, one member reacted with alarm, gesturing toward the scene and urgently identifying the individuals as the same ones they had encountered before. Observed as more people started to assemble beneath the building, prompting him to act fast. Realizing the urgency, he urged the goblin that they needed to finish up swiftly and leave the scene before they got caught. The goblin failed to grasp what meant and suddenly attacked, making her cry out in terror and confusion. Fear rippled through the crowd gathered below as they realized the danger unfolding above them. Whispers turned into frantic cries as people exclaimed that the goblin had already wiped out the guild and was now targeting the only woman left alive. The onlookers grew terrified, worried that they could be the creature's next victims. His heart raced with anxiety as he realized just how out of control the situation had become. What began as a simple plan to get back at the guild had quickly spiraled, leaving him trapped in a perilous and uncomfortable predicament with no clear escape. Sprang into action, urgently commanding the goblin to halt and demanding that it spare from further harm. Those watching from below marveled at its bravery, impressed that he faced a goblin too strong for the guild, despite appearing inexperienced in his basic equipment. The goblin came to a sudden halt as stood frozen in terror, her body refusing to respond. At that moment, his eyes filled with tears, streaming down his face as he made a firm and heartfelt announcement that everything had come to an end. Once more, his remarks were misinterpreted by the crowd, who believed he was announcing the goblin's defeat. Excitement surged through the onlookers as they erupted into cheers for him. The crowd continued to shout encouraging words, hoping would triumph over the goblin. Their enthusiastic support left both amazed and bewildered, since they had no idea what was truly happening. Felt a surge of astonishment when he noticed how warmly they responded, having braced himself for ridicule instead of the encouragement he received. At that moment, came to the startling understanding that everyone around him was unaware he was responsible for summoning the goblin. He started to view the recent event differently, remembering how he had claimed responsibility for dealing with the goblin to shield the guild, even though he hadn't actually intended to follow through. Pictured himself boldly stepping in front of the woman, ordering the goblin to retreat. In his mind, she gazed at him with admiration and thanked him with grateful eyes. He kept imagining himself as a hero, visualizing moments where he declared bold statements, such as warning villains that their reign had ended, which made him feel admired by everyone around him. His excitement grew as he pictured himself playing the role of a courageous hero, putting his own safety on the line to rescue a woman from a vicious monster. The thought made him let out an odd, amused laugh. His laughter grew louder as he pictured everyone viewing him as a genuine hero who had just rescued a woman from a terrifying creature. Following the confrontation, advanced toward, his face darkened by a menacing glare. He threatened her, implying she could meet the same painful fate as her fallen friends. However, he offered her a chance at survival, declaring he would spare her life if she vowed to keep quiet and never reveal anything about his identity or the goblin. Her heart pounding with fear, nodded in agreement to his demand and assured him that she would keep what she had witnessed a secret. Offered a calm smile, his confidence clear as he expressed his agreement. With certainty, he now understood that would keep his secret about the goblin hidden from everyone else. Without warning, raised his voice at the goblin, boldly proclaiming that it would suffer consequences for attacking defenseless villagers and bringing so much disorder. With a fierce intensity, he raised his voice once more, vowing that he alone would bring this charade to a close. At that instant, triggered his goblin walk ability, causing a chain to materialize and wrap tightly around the goblin's neck, placing the creature firmly under his command. Rushed ahead, pulling the goblin along by its chain, his voice ringing out with a fierce promise that he would never pardon the creature for its actions. He yanked the goblin with such strength that the creature stumbled, its face showing clear bewilderment at the unexpected situation. With a surge of incredible strength, hurled the goblin down, slamming it forcefully against the ground. He pulled the goblin along, his voice rumbling with self-assured growls. The onlookers watched in amazement as demonstrated a technique that resembled glowing chains, a powerful ability known for holding back even the fiercest monsters. They could hardly believe that a person from a starting village possessed such a rare and advanced skill. Just then, noticed a notification from the system informing him that the goblin's mood had brightened because of the goblin walk skill. Although puzzled by this, maintained his role as the hero, urging the others to move away from the danger. Containing the goblin's behavior proved to be a struggle for him. From afar, observed the scene and realized why the guild had not been able to overcome the goblin. She concluded that its abilities must have surpassed level 50. The crowd surrounding her froze in disbelief, their voices rising as they wondered aloud about the identity of this impressive player. They soon realized that was not at fault for the outcome. Instead, it became clear that possessed extraordinary power. At the same time, pretended to struggle against the goblin, yet secretly relied on his abilities to forcefully shove the creature back. He activated a recently acquired ability known as goblin feeding, causing a portion of food meant especially for goblins to materialize in his palm. With a sweeping motion, he flung the food into the distance and declared to the goblin that its fate had been sealed. The goblin, filled with excitement, sprinted toward the food and snatched it up, letting out enthusiastic sounds as it dashed away. Seizing the opportunity, urgently called out for the city gates to be shut right away, determined to keep the goblin from returning. As the gates started to close rapidly, the goblin chased after the food without hesitation. The moment the goblin made it through, the heavy gates clanged shut right behind its back. The crowd let out relieved breaths, exchanging anxious glances as they quietly sought confirmation from one another that everything had finally come to an end. faced the crowd, her voice barely above a whisper and heavy with fatigue, as she checked if anyone had been hurt. As the crowd erupted in applause and cheers their voices rang out in excitement, praising him for banishing the goblin and rescuing everyone. Let out a sigh of relief, realizing the danger had passed for now, and privately acknowledged that he had narrowly avoided gaining a reputation as the madman responsible for destroying a whole guild. Moved softly toward, explaining that every member of her guild had perished and returned to life at the Resurrection Temple in Pascal. She revealed that she alone understood the complete reality of his link to the goblin. Instantly realized that this was the very woman she had seen earlier. She quietly let him know through her steady demeanor that her promise would be kept, and that the events would remain a secret. Took advantage of the moment to inquire whether Pascal truly functioned as a sanctuary, offering players unlimited health and shielding them from both monsters and fellow participants. Without warning, his face twisted into a menacing glare. He issued a chilling threat too, warning that if she failed to keep her word, he would make her suffer endlessly at the Resurrection Temple, killing her over and over and causing her immeasurable pain. Fear overwhelmed her, and she desperately tried to insist that she never meant to break her word. The force of her terror sent a piercing scream reverberating across the whole city. Ultimately, stretched out on the ground, a sense of calm washing over him as he reflected silently, realizing he had never intended for any of the turmoil to unfold. As stretched out on his bed, a wave of happiness washed over him. He looked around at the beautiful room, knowing it was a reward for his good deeds, and felt a deep sense of pride in what he had accomplished. His face shifts to a grave look as memories of a previous event come to mind. He looks back with a heavy heart, wishing he had been stronger in the past. If he had possessed the power he lacked, he believes he might have rescued the beautiful woman whose life had been at risk. A short while later, a crucial memory resurfaces in his mind. He had entirely overlooked the goblin point that the Goblin Lord had given him. A new panel materializes before him, displaying his name, alongside his current class, Goblin Summoner. Noting the single goblin point he currently holds, he inwardly jokes about the possibility of goblins considering him family if he continues to collect points, particularly since he has gained them through clever schemes and deceit. Chose to open the goblin skill shop, only to discover that every advanced skill remained inaccessible. Faced with no alternatives, he understood that selecting the sole unlocked skill was his only option. He activated the Goblin Gathering skill, pondering to himself about the true effects of this ability. Without warning, the goblin that he had summoned earlier charged into the room, its presence radiating an intense and frightening power. Let out a panicked scream upon realizing that the Goblin Gathering was actually a summoning ability, not an ordinary skill, which filled him with anxiety at the thought that someone could find out a goblin was hiding in his room. Panic surged through him as he struggled to soothe the goblin, which had begun to wreak havoc throughout the room. Fearing the consequences if their secret was discovered, he worried about what actions to take next. At that moment, noticed the sound of the innkeeper tapping on the door, his voice filled with concern as he inquired about its well-being. Feeling uneasy, assured the innkeeper that everything was all right, but accidentally warned him to leave if he valued his life. Catching himself, hastily changed his words, simply requesting that the innkeeper go away. Attempted to soothe the goblin, swiftly offering an apology for the earlier incident, and urging the creature to relax and release whatever it had in its grasp. That night, confided in the goblin, his voice soft as he shared how upset he felt about the events that had unfolded. He had been ridiculed and hurt, despite being innocent of any wrongdoing. Gazed at the goblin with a sorrowful expression, expressing that they were alike, while the goblin gently acknowledged the sentiment in return. Remained stretched out on the bed beside the goblin, reflecting aloud on how this world was filled with unkind people. In another part of the city, the entrance to a tavern bursts open as an employee greets arriving patrons. Within the bustling tavern, several guild members occupied a table. As entered, one guild member noticed him and immediately recognized him as the troublemaker from the previous day, calling out his presence with a harsh tone. Appeared uneasy, his cheeks tinged with embarrassment as he confessed to being the person who had rescued someone from the guild. Despite his admission, Anxiety weighed on him in the bustling crowd, especially since his goblin companion was nowhere nearby. In, known as the Harbinger of Death from the Guild, fixed his intense stare on and acknowledged that, after all that had occurred, had no obligation to assist them. Despite this, In offered his gratitude in a cold, unsettling voice that made shudder with fear. Unnerved by In's frightening expression, pleaded for him not to express his thanks in such a terrifying manner. Reassures, insisting that extra caution is unnecessary. She observes that demeanor shows no signs of aggression. However, deep down, she realizes that they are both being deceived, as is cleverly concealing the real situation involving the goblin. Acknowledged the events and confessed that he had assisted them, even though they had previously tried to end his life, since he required their help for his own purposes. Nodded in agreement, reminding them that they were indebted to him. He assured them that the guild always remembered those who helped them and would offer their support in any way possible. Pointed out that remaining in the beginner zone no longer offered him any advantages, particularly now that he had surpassed level 30. Eager to advance, he expressed his desire to reach a new region as soon as possible and wondered if anyone knew the way. Wondered aloud whether he was referring to a location known as, then mentioned that he possibly knew someone who could assist him in reaching that destination. Out of nowhere, an elderly man called out from a distance, confidently announcing his knowledge of the route too. The elderly man moves toward with haste, expressing heartfelt regret for what had happened between them before. The man maintained a calm demeanor as he observed his actions, concluding that his display of power against a single goblin was proof of his incredible strength. The destroyer, who was at level 28, nodded in agreement. He considered that could possibly surpass his own strength, a thought that left him feeling slightly irritated. Reflected silently, admitting to himself that he wasn't as strong as the others. He goes on to explain that, had In truly carried out his threat and attacked him the previous day, the blow would have been fatal. Within the beginner zone known as Leaf, there are 5 basic dungeons, one of which is the grassy region where slimes are commonly found. The Mine Dungeon, the shadowy expanse of the dark forest, and various other locations came into view. The dungeons, referred to as open-field dungeons, could be entered by anyone whenever they wished. Despite his desire to leave the Leaf Zone, the old man informed him that escaping would only be possible after defeating a powerful raid boss within a dungeon. This explanation sparked curiosity, leading him to wonder about the true nature of a raid boss dungeon. The old man explains that raid dungeons work differently compared to open-field dungeons. These dungeons are equipped with gates that only open and close at certain times, and there are strict rules about how many times players can enter and how long they can stay inside. And pointed out that each region's last challenge was the raid boss dungeon, and only players who had reached a sufficient level could take it on. He went on to clarify that in Leaf, this particular dungeon became accessible just once every month, which explained why so many people had assembled at that moment to get ready for the upcoming battle. At that instant, understands that their being there holds significant meaning. Nodded in agreement, going on to clarify that the raid boss dungeon had actually opened the previous day, but a troublesome goblin had unexpectedly shown up and ruined everything. His eyes widened in disbelief as the news sank in, and he understood with sudden clarity that he would be trapped in the Leaf Zone for an entire month, forced to wait until the raid boss dungeon reopened. As memories of earning more than $200,000 by defeating a level 80 monster flood his mind, anger starts to boil within him. He recognizes that the goblin in his possession has the power to conquer even more challenging dungeons with ease. Despite this potential, he faces the frustrating reality of being trapped for a whole month without any income. Seized in by the collar, his face flushed with anger as he shouted and insisted on learning about any alternative escape routes, making it clear he had no intention of letting his precious time be squandered. Confirmed the statement, explaining that everyone was upset because of the missed chance. He announced that their obligation to was fulfilled, prompting the group to start getting ready to depart. As the group departed, his expression revealed a mix of sadness and frustration over the recent events. As prepared to leave, she cast a sympathetic glance toward, then turned to join the rest as they headed outside. Under the darkness of night, the guild members slipped away from the area, making sure not to draw any attention to themselves. At the same time, the goblin crouched behind a wooden crate, a mischievous grin spreading across its face as it chuckled quietly to itself. Without warning, the goblin raises its head, its senses sharpening as it detects an odd presence nearby. The sky above the area stretched wide and cloudless, with not a single star hidden from view. Without warning, the gate to the raid boss dungeon swung open a second time, accompanied by a bright system message announcing that the raid boss dungeon was now accessible. Everyone in the room stared in astonishment as the elderly man voiced his disbelief, insisting that another raid shouldn't be available for 30 days. Fixed his gaze on the gate, his thoughts racing as he reminded himself that the raid boss dungeon was not meant to be accessible at this time. As stood frozen in shock, a bright notification appeared before him, announcing that the raid boss dungeon had been reopened. Expresses his surprise upon discovering that the raid boss dungeon has reopened so soon. All the people gathered in front of the gate, surprised as it swung open only a day after someone had last gone through it. Wanted to know how many individuals were present inside the dungeon, so he questioned the elderly man about it. The elderly man explained that the dungeon was currently empty because the group that had prepared for it finished their task the previous day and had already advanced to another location. It observes that, as a result, only the two of them are present on this occasion. At that moment, flashed a wicked grin, revealing that he had sensed something was amiss all along. He seethed with anger as he confronted the guild members, realizing they had deceived him. The truth dawned on him. They had plotted to make him lag behind so they could enter the dungeon before him, betraying his trust to get ahead. Let out a frustrated scream, his thoughts consumed by regret for placing his trust in them once more, even after all he had already endured. Hastily attempted to dismiss the accusation, anxiously insisting to that he had misunderstood everything and that there had been no deception. Remains unfazed by the uneasy atmosphere, and with a steady voice, inquires if intends to join the group. Stands his ground, making it clear that he will not allow the others to go inside without him and claim the rewards for themselves. Understanding's resolve, In accepts this and chooses to briefly explain what is happening before they proceed. He shares that, according to their information, the raid dungeon is made up of only one chamber, with the boss waiting for them immediately upon entry, making it crucial for everyone to be completely ready. He mentioned that it probably wouldn't pose much of a threat because their abilities were well above the dungeon's difficulty, but he still recommended they stay alert, just to be safe. At that moment, the destroyer interrupts, his tone filled with pride, and asserts that although the guild leader is absent, every elite member of it is still accounted for. The group buzzed with anticipation as they got ready to go in, grew even more confident, loudly claiming that the boss would be beaten in only 10 seconds. Exuding calmness and confidence, signaled that the moment to start had arrived, prompting everyone to head toward the gate together. At the same time, warned the goblin that things would become complicated if anyone else discovered its presence, and instructed it to remain concealed until he called for it himself. A vivid memory of being betrayed in the past flashes through his mind, making him resolve with determination to prevent such a thing from ever happening to him again. He opened his inventory and noticed that an advanced healing stone remained among his items. This powerful object had the ability to restore a player to life with 100 health points if their HP ever dropped to 0. The discovery caught him off guard, and he questioned how the stone had managed to stay unused until now. Chooses to overlook the small detail and hurries toward the gate, convincing himself that it no longer holds any importance. He at last made his way into the dungeon, passing through the shimmering portal. As stepped inside, he was taken aback by his surroundings, his wonder clearly showing as he realized this must be the raid boss dungeon. Without warning, a towering steel colossus with a level of 40 emerged in front of the group. Fear swept through everyone as they realized this was no ordinary dungeon. Instead, they had stumbled upon a secret one. A notification popped up on the display, verifying the discovery. A secret dungeon had been found, the domain of a colossal steel monster. And shouted at the elderly man, his voice filled with anger as he demanded to know what sort of scheme was unfolding. The old man, clearly bewildered, replied that he had no knowledge of any such plan. Overwhelmed by terror and desperation, pleaded with to stop hesitating and urged him to hurry toward the gate. Responded with a sarcastic smirk, questioning whether the others could possibly be serious at that moment. He raised his voice at the team, his anger evident as he accused them of intending to escape the dungeon. With a mocking tone, he questioned whether they truly understood the kinds of treasures a dungeon of this caliber could offer. A member of the group retorted sharply, insisting that everyone was already aware of that fact. Despite this, the real issue lay in the boss's strength. At level 40, a single blow from it could do more than just end their lives. It might bring about far worse outcomes. Despite the concerns, argued that the gap in levels was just 10, insisting that the worst outcome would be severe injuries rather than being forced to quit the game for good. Finished presenting his case, his voice steady with assurance as he posed a challenging question to his audience. He wondered aloud if they truly believed that achieving extraordinary rewards should come without difficulty. With conviction, he asserted that none of them could possibly fathom the incredible treasures that lay concealed within hidden dungeons. Stood his ground, addressing the teammates who had chosen to abandon the mission. With a mocking tone, he remarked that they were welcome to flee if that was their decision. He added that he would simply claim all the rewards for himself. Tapped into his unique goblin summoner ability, calling out powerfully for the goblin to appear and rescue him. Unaware of the situation unfolding, the goblin outside glanced around in bewilderment, unable to comprehend why it had been called so abruptly. At the same time, the massive steel creature lunged toward with incredible force and velocity, preparing to strike. Its voice rang out once more, heavy with both desperation and frustration, as she attempted to call forth the goblin and demanded its immediate appearance. However, her efforts failed, and the creature did not arrive when she needed it most. Was struck head-on by the giant, losing his life in a single blow. Immediately after, a system notification appeared, confirming his death. Glanced down its lifeless form with a mocking expression, feeling astonished that this was the same person who had battled the goblin just the day before, only to meet such a humiliating end. Its tone was icy and detached, making it clear that whatever happened to was of no concern to them. He soon realized the gate had shut without warning, which left him in a state of shock. The elderly man spoke with a grave tone, pointing out that everyone had misjudged the dungeon's danger. He clarified that, on rare occasions, a secret dungeon could emerge unexpectedly from what seemed like an ordinary raid dungeon. He went on to clarify that the reason they were up against a level 40 steel giant was because of these circumstances, leaving them with no option except to battle. At the same time, jolted awake, his body racked with pain from the sudden shock. He was furious that he had been defeated in a single blow, especially since he was well above level 30. Confused and enraged, he wondered how it was possible for him to be taken down so effortlessly. Soon realized, feeling a wave of regret, that he had failed to allocate his available stat points. 26 points remained unused, points that might have given him an advantage during the fight. He soon understood, feeling a wave of regret, that the closed gate now prevented him from calling forth the goblin. Frustrated, he shifted the blame onto the goblin for failing to appear quickly enough, thinking bitterly about how near the treasure had been. Without hesitation, the team leader raised his voice with enthusiasm and authority, announcing that the attack was commencing and motivating his teammates to launch the hunt. Found himself in utter disbelief as the events before him unfolded, leaving him stunned by the unexpected revelations. In that instant, activated her unique ability, Wind Arrow, causing every teammate to move twice as fast as before. In, known as the Shadow, and Min, called the, surged ahead with incredible speed, each getting ready to attack the towering steel giant. The elderly man directed In and Min to launch the initial assault on the creature, urging them to search for any vulnerabilities. He pointed out that with enhancement to their speed, the beast would be too slow to strike back right away. In and Min coordinated their movements, attacking the steel giant swiftly and from several angles at once. Despite their persistent attacks, the monster unleashed a fearsome roar, desperately fighting back against them. In and Min unleashed a formidable combined technique known as the sequential slash, striking their target with a rapid series of 16 blows in quick succession. The elderly man revealed that each creature possessed at least one vulnerable spot, and by using their skills together, the group would be able to pinpoint it with precision. Following the assault, In turned to Min, hoping he had identified a vulnerability in the creature. However, Min revealed that their efforts had inflicted no harm at all, which left In completely bewildered. In nodded in agreement, suggesting there could be two explanations. One possibility was that the creature possessed an exceptionally strong defense. Perhaps there was a different, hidden cause, one that became more apparent after the group witnessed the creature unleash a furious, thunderous roar. Immediately following the previous moment, the group's leader, dressed in a dark cloak, sprang ahead and unleashed a strong attack against the creature. He activated a technique known as Peerless Blade. Despite the forceful blow, the leader observed that their lighter strikes had little effect on the creature. The explanation revealed that the creature possessed a unique ability known as Hatred of the Weak. A notification from the system announced that this passive skill would fully block any attack, inflicting less than 5% of the creature's overall health. Raised his voice in the shadow's direction, insisting that he alone could inflict harm upon a level 40 monster. The elderly man insisted that In did not possess the most powerful attack among them. He explained that another individual could surpass In's abilities when the circumstances were right. At that instant, known as the Harbinger of Death, her formidable ability called Final Death Arrow. She reminded herself that if the guild ever discovered she possessed this technique, they would insist she take on the role of their leader. Surprise was evident upon discovering that had such an ability. Although he admitted he had no idea how it worked, he vowed to give her the chance she needed to use it, regardless of the risk to himself. He unleashed his war cry skill, letting out a powerful roar that captured the monster's focus and directed its attention solely to him. The plan succeeded, causing the monster to let out an angry roar as it turned all its fury toward. While remained sprawled on the ground, he observed the chaotic scene with a mix of anxiety and irritation, mentally berating for foolishly attracting the monster's gaze rather than making a swift escape. The creature unleashed a vicious assault, inflicting severe harm, yet endured the onslaught and survived. After striking the monster, taunted it, expressing disappointment in its weakness and insisting that the attack had caused only minimal harm. The elderly man raised his voice cautioning him to stay alert and emphasizing that their achievement relied on avoiding errors. At that moment, the elderly man activated a special ability called Pain Sharing, causing any harm received to be divided between himself and. He clarified that whoever had the greater amount of health would end up absorbing a larger portion of the pain. Watched the scene intently, quickly realizing that the group's levels were on the lower side and that none of them possessed any hidden classes. This only made him more puzzled about where their real power came from. Simultaneously, the head of the assassination team explained that their strategy depended on the two warriors keeping the monster occupied, allowing the assassins to weaken its defenses with their own subtle abilities. He informed the group about their passive ability known as Weak Point Reduction, a skill that lowered an opponent's defense by 2% each time it triggered. This effect had a 1% chance of activating with every attack and could accumulate up to 5 times for greater impact. Watch the battle unfold, marveling at how skillfully they worked together and how much strength they displayed against the monster. He started to question whether this was what real strength looked like when it came from a skilled and tightly knit guild. His frustration grew as he realized that, being dead, he would miss out on any experience or rewards if another person managed to defeat the monster. The thought of losing everything weighed heavily on his mind. At that instant, the creature shifted its gaze back toward, causing him to jolt in alarm and feel a wave of anxiety as the menacing figure drew closer. His voice filled with anger, demanded to know why the monster's attention was focused elsewhere, insisting that he was the real opponent it needed to confront. The creature struck the earth with incredible strength, sending shockwaves through the ground and revealing the true extent of its power. At that moment, rose to his feet, having made up his mind to use the powerful healing stone to bring himself back. With a mocking tone, he remarked that watching the group struggle was unbearable, claiming he would step in to assist them because he possessed the greatest strength of anyone there. A notification emerged, stating that the advanced healing stone would restore the player to life with 100 health points if their HP dropped to 0. Smirked, silently reflecting on how the hero never showed up on time. Without warning, the system broadcast that the steel giant had locked onto as its next target. The steel giant unleashed a devastating attack named Surface Destruction, wiping out numerous members of the team in an instant. Overcome with fury, let out a frustrated scream, regretting that he hadn't come back to life sooner. The powerful blow sent multiple team members flying backward, leaving them badly hurt from the collision. Froze in shock, his eyes taking in the sight of his injured teammates scattered on the ground nearby. He raised his voice in anger at the creature, insisting it explain why it had attacked his companions. The elderly man shouted a caution too, urging him to remain attentive at this crucial moment. Despite the warning, chose to disregard it and activated his formidable ability, Giant Slash, rushing toward the creature with incredible strength. Even though struck with impressive force, the attack managed to cause just 3,890 points of damage, making it clear that this monster was both incredibly strong and tough to defeat. The elderly man persisted in activating the pain distribution skill, attempting to divide the damage with. However, he suffered a severe blow, losing 2,456 HP. Groaning in both pain and disappointment, he quietly admitted to himself that his strategy had failed. Suddenly, a system notification flashes across the screen, revealing that both the destroyer and the clever elderly man have died. Remains rooted to the spot, his mind reeling with disbelief and uncertainty as he tries to grasp the consequences of his recent actions. His anger flared as he raised his voice, insisting that the blame didn't belong to him and that his only action had been to bring himself back to life. At that instant, known as the Shadow, materialized once more, positioning himself for combat and prepared to make his move. He remembers that monsters tend to go after healers or long-distance fighters first, instead of those wearing heavy armor. Inyuk kept studying the situation and explained that his ability had drawn the monster's attention, causing it to target rather than the healers. He realizes that coming back to life threw off the monster's original plan, making it change targets without warning and eliminate the whole team before anyone had a chance to respond. At the same time, known as the Harbinger of Death, glanced anxiously at uncertain about her next move. She wondered if it was the right moment to let her arrow fly or if she should hold back. Her unique ability, the one-shot death bow, required her to sacrifice some of her own health each time she used it, and at that moment her health was down to just 46%. Raised his voice in frustration, insisting that she hold back from releasing the arrow at that moment, and stressing that acting now might jeopardize everything they had carefully planned. He goes on to explain that the assassination team's passive ability is not fully activated yet. With only 3 out of 5 stacks, their power remains insufficient to take down the monster in just one strike. It makes up his mind to distract the monster himself, taking on the responsibility, and firmly tells that she must keep her skill active no matter what happens. He makes it clear that without delivering the final attack, their hopes of winning will vanish. At the same time, approaches with noticeable caution, unsure as he wonders if she needs any assistance and attempts to lend a hand. With a biting tone, ridiculed him, questioning what he was capable of achieving without his goblin by his side. She went on to dismiss him, insisting that he should stay out of their way since, at this moment, he was only causing trouble for everyone. Felt a wave of sadness as she questioned inwardly why the girl gazed at him in that particular way. He considered whether her reaction was only because he no longer had his goblin by his side. Frustration simmered within him as he began to silently fault the others, believing they were to blame for his inability to bring his goblin along. His grin twisted with madness as his thoughts raced. He stubbornly blamed the others for their troubles, even though they were powerless. He couldn't understand why they acted so cruelly towards him when they clearly depended on him so much. Memories of his goblins, level 999, flashed through his mind. With bitter sarcasm, he decided he would simply stand back and watch them struggle and fail without his help. At that instant, the massive metal behemoth fixed its sights on the harbinger of doom and hurled itself at her with astonishing velocity. It notices that the monster's attention has shifted too, exactly as he had anticipated, given her role as the team's long-distance attacker. He attempts to draw the monster's focus away from the others, shouting loudly to convince it that he is the rightful target. He unleashed a potent attack known as Frenzy, striking the monster and inflicting 1,920 points of damage. The monster wasted no time in fighting back, unleashing a fearsome roar before striking with overwhelming force. Sprang upward, narrowly avoiding the attack, and declared with determination that the fight was far from finished. He launched another attack, determined to draw the monster's attention toward himself once more. He unleashed Twin Blade Frenzy once more, inflicting another 1,908 points of damage. He kept attacking with speed and determination, aiming to make the monster focus all its attention on him as the main danger. For the third time, he unleashed the same technique against the monster, successfully dealing another 1,912 points of damage. At last, stopped briefly, astonished that the creature had needed 3 of his strongest attacks before it began to recognize him as a genuine danger. The steel giant let out another fearsome roar. At the same time, a message appeared, announcing that it had chosen in the shadow as its next target. A different display revealed that the monster still had 22,460 out of its original 30,000 HP. It wondered why his earlier assaults hadn't done more damage, especially after using his defense-lowering skill 3 times. He understood that his only option was to stall for, so he began to provoke the monster with mocking words, questioning whether it had become angry yet. It activated a unique assassination technique known as rapid evasion, granting him the ability to avoid every physical strike for a duration of 3 seconds. With confidence, he claimed those next 3 seconds as his own. At a pivotal instant, a chilling notification materialized before Int's eyes, warning him that he did not possess sufficient mana to use his skill. Shock and fear flooded through him as he realized the dire situation. Due to the lack of mana, is struck hard by the monster's attack. The force of the blow hurls him through the air, and his cries of pain echo as the impact causes him tremendous injury. At that instant, freezes in disbelief while Int's lifeless form crumples to the ground before him. Suddenly, a notification materializes, announcing that In the shadow has perished. Erupted into a fit of frantic screams, hurling accusations at the team for their lack of intelligence and strength. He was overwhelmed with regret for choosing to return to life, convinced that he would have been better off remaining dead instead of facing the present circumstances. Overwhelmed with anger, directs her rage at him, blaming his return for destroying everything and sending the situation into chaos. A fierce and tense dispute erupts between the two. Passionately argues that an extra 10 seconds would have been enough for her to succeed. In response, shouts that he would prefer for everyone to perish rather than allow them to claim the rewards without his involvement. At that moment, the steel giant unleashed another thunderous roar that shook the ground, and spun around to face the monster, terror flashing across their faces when they understood that its attention had shifted to them. A notification revealed that the massive steel creature had chosen, known as the Harbinger of Death, as its next victim and was quickly approaching their location. Cut off the argument, her voice rising in a desperate scream as she insisted that blaming each other would have to wait. Without hesitating any longer, she made up her mind to release her arrow, even though it hadn't gathered all its power yet. She notices behaving oddly next to her, and puzzled, wonders about his actions. Glanced at her, a dark grin spreading across his face, and posed a threatening question, pointing out that she was unable to move while preparing to fire her arrow. Jumped in surprise, her voice trembling as she questioned his intentions. She let out a terrified scream, desperately pleading for to stay away from her. Without warning, seized her by the arm and took off at a sprint, reminding her that she was the one who'd asked for 10 more seconds. Meanwhile, startled screams echoed behind them, filled with surprise and fear. Sprang aside, narrowly avoiding the monster's strike. A wild laugh escaped him, revealing the thrill he felt from the perilous pursuit. Stood frozen in disbelief, marveling at how quickly moved, his swift motions reminding her of the shadow. She wondered how anyone could achieve such incredible speed. Silently admitted to himself that he had invested all 26 of his unused stat points into speed, which granted him extraordinary quickness, so much so that he could now match the agility of elite assassins. Without warning, notices that his recent disagreement with has resulted in him receiving another goblin point. This makes him question whether the Goblin Lord is hinting that he might have been at fault. Just then, announced that her arrow was prepared to launch, prompting to urgently demand that she release it immediately. Her voice, trembling with both anger and worry, cautioned him that everything would be lost if she failed. Desperate, she pleaded for him to stop putting so much pressure on her. Paid no attention to her request and hoisted her onto his shoulder. He loudly demanded repayment, claiming she owed him for the blood he had shed and for the costly healing stone he had already used. The creature started to whirl around with ferocious energy, signaling that it was about to unleash a powerful attack covering the entire area. With immense power, it released its attack, leaving widespread devastation throughout the surrounding area. At the decisive instant, unleashes her unique ability, the one-shot death bow, and takes careful aim at the monster. Surged ahead, sprinting at maximum speed within his arms, his voice booming as he urged her to finish the fight while she her final, powerful arrow aimed at the monster. The steel giant unleashed a thunderous roar, channeling an immense force as it activated a devastating ability known as the World Destruction Skill. With a powerful strike, the giant pounds the earth, sending fragments of debris flying in all directions around its massive form. Stood frozen in disbelief, his mind racing with the realization that the monster had secretly possessed a perilous ability the entire time. Swiftly understands that the assault reaches everyone nearby. He recalls that health is dangerously low at just 18 HP, while his own is at a full 100 HP after being revived. With this in mind, he knows a direct hit would be fatal for them both. Raised her weapon, attempting to target the monster, but the swirling debris in the air made it nearly impossible for her to get a clear shot. She nervously admits her difficulty in getting a clear shot under the current circumstances, while mentions that unusual images are starting to appear in his thoughts. Initially, believes that what he sees could offer a way out of their situation, prompting her to question him about his vision. However, she is soon taken aback when he reveals that he is simply recalling moments from his childhood spent with friends. With a hint of sarcasm, remarks that he must be witnessing his life replaying before him. Without warning, an unforeseen event unfolds. The atmosphere splits apart as a bizarre rift tears through the air, and a menacing, clawed hand thrusts forward. Moments later, the source is revealed. Goblin emerges through the opening, making a chilling entrance while emitting a wild, unsettling laugh. Shouted at the goblin with frustration, complaining about its delayed arrival, and expressing that it seemed as if an entire week had passed since he last used the summoning skill. Stands frozen in disbelief, her mind reeling as she tries to process the unbelievable scene unfolding before her eyes. She stared in shock, unable to believe that the goblin had managed to rip open the very walls of the dungeon to get inside, certain that something like that could never happen. Without warning, enthusiastically revealed that he was activating a hidden technique known as Goblin Shield, which served as a form of protection. The towering steel colossus let out an enraged howl, its massive frame tensing as if readying itself for one last, devastating assault. Responded with a confident smirk, openly mocking the monster by implying that its statement was quite daring for a boss that had been concealed in a dungeon. And positioned themselves behind the goblin, announcing in unison that the most intense moment of the fight had come at last. After gathering all her energy, released her most powerful move, the one-shot death bow, striking the giant with an enormous force that inflicted 22,524 points of damage. The forceful blow drives straight through the metal titan, causing it to halt abruptly while icy fissures rapidly snake across its frame. The steel giant crashed onto the ground in defeat. At that moment, a system notification appeared, announcing that they had successfully completed the secret dungeon known as the Steel Giant's Chamber. Stared in amazement, her voice filled with joy and shock as she marveled at their unexpected victory, and the fact that they had conquered the secret dungeon. A notification suddenly popped up, revealing that level had jumped from 27 to 31. Received yet another notification, this time letting him know that his level had risen from 31 to 34. Overwhelmed with excitement at this progress, he leaped into the air, celebrating his accomplishment. Could hardly contain his excitement as he burst into frantic screams, urgently insisting on discovering the prize he had won for completing the dungeon. A notification suddenly appeared, declaring that every team member who had been defeated in the raid was brought back to life once the battle ended. Meanwhile, the team leader, dressed in a black cloak, started checking on the others to make sure they were unharmed. A member of the team mentioned tasting blood in his mouth, yet assured everyone that he was unharmed. He showed his relief about their victory over the monster, pointing out that if the creature had been any stronger, the group might have faced grave danger. Without warning, a worried voice pointed out that had stopped breathing. In response, another person with a hint of sarcasm remarked that giving a strong slap would surely bring him back to consciousness. The leader of the Black Cloaks fixed a serious gaze on, and demanding that they clarify precisely what had just occurred. At that moment, behaved unusually, clutching all the treasure that had fallen from the monster. He shouted frantically, pleading with the others to stay away from him. Glanced toward the leader, uncertainty in her eyes, and struggled to find the words to describe the situation with. At the same time, a notification popped up, announcing that level had risen from 31 to 34. Overcome with excitement, began to leap into the air, his happiness obvious to anyone watching. Without warning, erupted into frantic screams, his voice filled with desperation as he insisted over and over that he deserved his reward immediately. A sudden system message pops up in front of him, leaving him stunned. The message explains that he still has not met the requirements needed to access a hidden class. Feels a wave of disappointment wash over her, as she receives a message revealing that she, like the others, has not qualified for a hidden class. She felt puzzled, questioning whether completing a secret dungeon was still not sufficient to unlock a hidden class. Meanwhile, pondered his situation and realized that, much like how the Goblin Lord's approval had granted him the Goblin class, there were probably specific requirements within the secret dungeon itself that one had to fulfill in order to earn a hidden class. Came to understand that getting the hidden class before taking down the dungeon boss would have been a smarter move. However, he pushed the thought aside, knowing it was useless to dwell on it any longer. He began to yell once more, insisting that he needed to grab the monster's loot before time ran out. Urgently calls out for him to halt, insisting that although their team delivered the finishing strike, all members played a part in the fight, so the treasure ought to be divided fairly after discussing it with everyone. Continued to shout uncontrollably, ignoring everything around him, while clutching the rewards to his chest with even greater determination. The leader and another member took their places next to, their eyes fixed on with a mix of astonishment and amusement. Inside, they questioned whether his fixation on the treasure was making him act like. Feeling attacked, loudly insisted that the loot meant everything to him. The leader, maintaining a composed demeanor, explained to that although they had assisted twice, their main objective had already been accomplished, so they saw no reason to claim more than what they needed. Was taken aback by this unexpected display of integrity. Without warning, the elderly man strode over to and delivered a sharp smack to his head. With a firm voice, he reminded that he had warned in about the shadow from the very beginning, insisting that all this chaos could have been avoided. His anger boiled over as he shouted at both the old man and the rest of the team, his voice filled with rage. He accused them all of having betrayed him, and not just once but 2 times. The team leader responded with a composed yet resolute tone, making it clear that dismissing at that moment would pose no challenge, and if force had been their intention, they would have already acted. The leader gestures toward, granting him permission to claim all the loot. However, his attention shifts to the bow in his hands. He explains that this particular weapon is not ordinary. It is the Iron Giant's bow, a rare find. The leader then questions whether understands just how precious this item truly is. Suddenly feels a surge of panic, his voice trembling as he desperately tries to understand the situation. He is especially confused and anxious because he has never been an archer and has no idea how to handle the weapon. came to the understanding that this item was special, restricted so that it could neither be traded nor equipped unless the person using it was an archer. Raised his voice with determination, insisting on holding onto the item. He argued that unlike everyone else, he lacked anything special of his own and wanted to keep this one unique possession. A member of the group, clearly frustrated, demanded that stop acting selfishly and insisted that the bow be given to, who was known as the bringer of death. Flashed a sly grin, making it clear that he was willing to hand over the bow, but only on the condition that he received something in exchange. The leader stared in shock, unable to believe that the item before them was both untradeable and unsellable, a fact that only increased its extraordinary worth. Burst into wild laughter, his tone dripping with mockery as he insisted that, ultimately, they would have no choice but to purchase the item from him if they ever hoped to obtain it. Burst into wild, echoing laughter alongside his goblin companion. Nearby, a guild member looked on with a grimace of revulsion, silently noting how much truly mirrored the goblin they had seen before. Meanwhile, Goblin crouched warily behind a cluster of rocks. Its eyes darted with unease as it watched working alongside the team, and a faint, worried whimper escaped its lips. Known as the bringer of death, gripped the unusual bow that had recently given her, and remarked to herself on its considerable weight. Offered the team a mocking expression of gratitude for the exchange. In response, the team leader, cloaked in black, remarked that he had long suspected possessed a rare gift for earning others' animosity. The leader of the black cloak questioned about his next destination, prompting to respond without hesitation, stating that the answer should be clear. Flashed a sly grin, making it clear he was heading to a place the others would not be. In response, the leader remarked that was a deeply disturbed individual. The team leader nodded in approval at suggestion, expressing support for the plan, and then turned to the group to check if everyone was prepared to head out. As they left together, cast a backward glance at, her eyes reflecting a blend of curiosity and intrigue. At that time, alongside his goblin companion, stood tall and self-assured as they got ready to depart. A notification appeared, announcing that the hidden raid dungeon had been cleared successfully. Paused to consider his situation, feeling a pang of regret over losing the rare bow. However, he found some consolation in the fact that he had received a valuable consumable in exchange. The item, called Thief's Glove, granted him the ability to steal a single item from any character of a lower level than himself, but only once. Comes to understand that the real reward lies in the high-purity steel he has obtained. A remarkable achievement considering that he was focused solely on mining not too long ago. Bursts into laughter, feeling delighted as he observes that, although everyone focused on the unusual weapon, no one realized the real worth of the rare metal he had acquired. The following morning, entered the bustling city of and found herself within the lively district known as Phoenix Market. A sense of awe and admiration washed over him as he observed the city bustling with high-level players, each adorned in elaborate gear unlike anything he had ever encountered. He couldn't help but marvel at the thought of how much these players must be earning from the game. Suddenly raised his voice in an odd way, claiming that he could detect the smell of money lingering in the air around them. He suddenly recalled that earning money would have to wait until he upgraded his equipment. The memory of being defeated in one blow by a monster much weaker than himself, 9 levels below, still stunned him. Suddenly understood the problem. He was still dressed in his battered, outdated armor from his days at level 3. Shock washed over him as he discovered that this gear not only failed to protect him, but actually decreased his defense stats. Without warning, the goblin let out a piercing scream, hoping to catch attention. Faced the goblin and issued a stern warning, making it clear through his expression that any mischief in the village would provoke his serious anger. Suddenly, an enormous creature emerged before them, startling so much that fear her, and she let out a terrified scream. Shouted in exasperation, questioning the unexpected presence of a boss-level monster in such an area, and urgently ordered the goblin to defend him without delay. Without warning, notices a woman's composed yet astonished tone, as she observes that it is rare to witness someone summon a goblin as their creature. A striking woman named, exuding both beauty and strength, suddenly appeared atop the monster. Reclining casually, she turned her attention to and questioned whether the goblin truly belonged to him as a summoned creature. His eyes widened in shock as she noticed a figure atop the monstrous creature. This discovery led her to question whether the beast might be a summoned entity, commanded by another player. The woman explained in a composed manner that the so-called monster behaved obediently within the village. Despite her reassurance, grew more unsettled, raising his voice in alarm as he noticed the monster staring at him and drooling excessively. Gazed intently at the woman, instantly recognizing the strength she possessed. Without needing to test her in battle, he could already tell just how formidable she really was. He explained that this woman possessed such incredible strength that even powerful guilds would be no match for her. The woman walked over with a gentle manner, politely requesting to know the child's name. Paused briefly before answering with his name. However, the woman gave him a gentle smile and explained that her question wasn't meant for him. Instead, she gestured toward the excitedly shouting goblin at his side, making it clear she had been addressing the little creature. Felt a jolt of surprise when the woman questioned him, wondering aloud if the goblin possessed a name, and if he had ever bothered to give it one. His irritation was obvious as she dismissed the matter as unimportant, questioning internally why anyone would bother naming a summoned monster. She could hardly believe that someone had just referred to that unattractive goblin as cute. The woman offered a gentle smile, explaining that relationships lacking mutual feelings often fail to last. She recommended that carefully observe his goblin. Perched high on the creature she rode, she went on to clarify that the goblin, even without the honor of a name, had instantly moved to shield him as soon as it heard the order to protect, proving its unwavering loyalty. She glanced at once more, her eyes gentle, and expressed her wish that their next meeting would be more interesting. After saying goodbye and addressing him as, she directed her creature, Michelle, to proceed. His voice dripping with sarcasm, called out after her, loudly pretending to thank her for her advice. Raising his voice even more, he insisted that he didn't need any help and claimed there were no issues between him and his goblin. Turning away, he ordered the goblin to get going. Later, as browsed through a gear shop, the shopkeeper gazed at him with astonishment and openly expressed strong disapproval of the gear had chosen to wear. The character criticized his outfit harshly, claiming that even real trash would look better. Introducing himself as Humphrey the Sharp-Tongued, the NPC left embarrassed and scrambling to explain that he was there precisely to get new equipment. Humphrey held out a solid piece of metal armor, his tone dripping with sarcasm as he claimed it was just right for someone of the boy's stature. Couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the price of the armor, 350 gold coins, which would be worth around $40 in real life. He reflected carefully, understanding that possessing the strongest summoned creature meant nothing if he was defeated himself, as that would result in immediate loss. Recognizing the importance of protection, he concluded that reliable armor was essential. With this in mind, he made the choice to purchase the armor. The shopkeeper admitted that, at the very least, knew how to pick quality equipment. He advised to put it to good use, explaining that the gear was specially made for people like him, crafted from the finest steel. Under his breath, remarked that the shopkeeper's reputation was well-deserved. Slipped into the new armor, a wide grin spreading across their face as a wave of happiness washed over them, thinking to themselves how impressive and comfortable the armor felt. Within seconds, he let out a furious cry, trapped beneath the crushing weight of the armor that pinned him in place. Nearby, Humphrey remarked coldly that someone had no business trying to move at all. At that moment, remembered pouring all his stat points into agility during his battle with the steel giant, and he understood he needed to get rid of the cumbersome armor as soon as possible. Humphrey sneered as he dismissed the armor as worthless junk, and proposed to repurchase it for a mere 30 gold coins. His frustration boiled over as he yelled, convinced that the NPC was cheating him. Without warning, spotted a shining gold exclamation point floating over Humphrey's head, and puzzled by the strange sight, tried to figure out what it meant. Humphrey frantically searched his surroundings, insisting that nothing was in sight. He soon realized that his unique blacksmith hammer had vanished, and a surge of frustration overcame him. Without it, he felt helpless, convinced that forging anything was now impossible. with a chilly tone, informed him that there were many other hammers available. Despite this, Humphrey persisted, arguing that this particular hammer was unique and he urgently needed it returned. Humphrey informed that the hammer could be found in the dungeon beneath the village's entrance, hidden within the underground waterway, and insisted that fetch it on his behalf. A notification popped up before, informing him that he had accepted a quest called Humphrey's Problem, which promised a reward: the skill to process materials for making armor. Had a sudden revelation about the true worth of the materials he had collected from the elusive monster. It was possible for them to be transformed into top-quality gear. Flashed a mischievous smile as he agreed to take on the quest, boldly echoing the name of the dungeon, Underground Waterway. He approached the dungeon entrance with unwavering confidence, convinced that concern for others was unnecessary. In his mind, any companions would merely hinder his progress. His grin widened as he confidently believed he could clear the simple dungeon in less than half an hour. However, his confidence faded when a sudden system message popped up, revealing an unusual quest condition that left him frozen in disbelief. Spun around in surprise to find Humphrey standing close behind, his face red with anger as he shouted for to return his hammer immediately. The notification made it clear that the quest would end in failure if anything happened to Humphrey, but overwhelmed and irritated, cried out in disbelief, wondering aloud why this non-player character had decided to tag along into the dungeon with him.